and welcome to Coast with Lou McCurry and Beau. It's been a little while. I'm a technology specialist here with Microsoft on the East Coast, based in Melbourne. Beau, tell us about yourself.
Hey everyone, I'm Beau. I am a technology specialist based in Perth. If you can see we are laughing, it's because we've had to take a few takes of this just to get back into the swing of things, and we've made a bunch of mistakes up till now. So just keep that in mind for the rest of the episode. We're a little rusty, but we're kicking on.
It has been a while. This is episode 11, right?
It is, yeah. So we survived 10 episodes, so kicking on to episode 11, and hopefully we'll keep kicking on for many more.
Yeah, well, this is a lot of fun. There's been a lot happening as well in the industry and within Microsoft, and we've had a lot of news lately, tech news. Beau, why don't you kick us off with what's new and what's been announced?
Yeah, so over the last month or so, there's been a whole bunch of things, purview moments, that we've tried to release a couple of specific features for that are kind of big for the industry, at least for us. So first off, we have admin units now available in preview within the Purview portal. So effectively, we can start scoping out admin permissions. That's currently available for data loss prevention. So you can start saying an admin can only affect policies in a particular area. So we can bring those permissions back and manage them from that way. We've got simulation mode for retention label has now moved into effect. So where we used to be able to run simulations was for information protection. So if we said classify everything in an environment as that's a credit card to be highly confidential, you could run a simulation to see what it would be affected. That wasn't in place for retention labels. So before you used to say, if I want credit cards to have a retention label, you'd automatically turn the policy on, it would go do it. Now we have the ability to tailor that as well so that we've got it in a simulation mode. So we can say, look, this is what's going to be affected by this label and when it's applied moving forward. So that's a big thing. We also have trainable classifiers. A bunch have now been moved into GA. I'll put those into the show notes, but we've also got a source code classifier that's in preview at the moment as well. So you can go ahead and start classifying source code. But obviously, trainable classifiers are that model where we can teach it via AI and machine learning to look for particular patterns. So we could look for harassment, for example.
Yeah, that's really because when we first released trainable classifiers, the concept, the focus I think was more around customers building their own based on their own content, and we've really added to that in-box number of trainable classifiers. So even if you never did build your own classifiers, you can detect, documents, financial documents, resumes, things that look like transaction or medical records, those sorts of things out of the box, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, and they're kind of split up into different sections now. So we've got things for IT, we've got things for HR, and they're kind of split out under some main categories that we can segment them out into. Obviously, customers can still train their own models and build out their own trainable classifiers, but this just supplements what they get out of the box. So that's a pretty big deal.
Great for discovery. Yeah.
The final thing that we've got coming up towards the end of the month is Microsoft Secure. That covers more than just Purview. That will be on the 28th of this month. Me and Lou are also, funnily enough, doing an insider risk management learning module within there. So it's a good time. So jump in. Make sure you go to our session because it's clearly the most important. But
you'll learn lots.
Exactly. We're all about the learning. So jump in, see where we are, and we'll build out from there.
Hey, speaking of learning, have you been playing with Bing AI? Because I have.
I have been playing too much with Bing AI, so I've been using it every day.
So it's awesome, obviously, but my take, the value, I know we talked about this earlier today, actually, with the team, but I'm really getting value out of it from the perspective of this thing being a research assistant. I like that analogy because and I had to explain what I was doing with this to someone the other day, and I said, it's like walking into a library, because I'm that old, I still know what a library is, but walk into a library and having an assistant go off and just get all the books on a particular topic for me, and then come back and say, here's close to what you're looking for, but I've narrowed down all of this stuff to this collection of stuff, and then I go through and actually do the fine, the fine reading and all the rest. Because I don't think it's quite. I think it's early days, and I've never had the expectation of it being something that's going to generate a finished, polished response to anything. But as a research assistant, fantastic, saving me so much time.
Well, I was playing around on it with my son the other day. We asked it to tell us what it knew about him, and there was 3 potential options. He was actually one of them. When he was 3, he was in a photo in a helicopter at a hospital pad because one of our relatives runs that sort of thing. So he was in there,
Yeah.
found the article, showed who it was, took us the picture. It was great. It was pretty accurate. The only pet peeve with it is people using it to write articles. I tell you what.
Starting to see some of that.
Every day.
Yeah. And there's no excuse for that because Bing AI will give you all the sources for the information. You know, it's your job to go and look up those sources and bring some human into it. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, and those AI checkers are getting more and more prevalent as well. So it's pretty easy to run something through that and find out if it was written. So just be aware of that if you're using it to write articles moving forward.
Yeah, we can tell.
Yeah.
We can tell. A piece of feedback from the other sessions, Beau, was that we've had people let us know that they like the demos. As we did a couple the last time around, and that's great to hear because it's what you and I do all day, every day, and it's really our bread and butter. So with that, I think one of the pieces of news that I find really, really exciting is this concept of adaptive protection that we're now talking about.
Yeah.
So I thought it'd be a good idea, Beau, if you could talk to us a bit about adaptive protection, maybe give us a bit of a walkthrough as well. Show us some stuff.
We will. So I've got a demo environment here. Luckily, I'm relatively well rehearsed at running demos. So adaptive protection at a high level is the ability to combine data loss prevention with our insider risk module and then start assigning policies dynamically based on a user's risk. So for those that don't know, insider risk assigns a risk level to a user based on either that user's actions or if it's doing particular sequences. So we've got a low, medium, or a high risk per user. You can now use that risk level to dynamically assign a data loss prevention policy to the user. So for example, you might have a user that is a high risk. They've done a bunch of malicious activities, potentially compromised at some point. That user
automatically my resignation.
Well, yeah, exactly. And that user automatically gets a DLP policy assigned to them where they can't share anything externally. We've locked it right down. You then have maybe a moderate risk for a user that has a policy dynamically assigned to them that they've got to provide a justification as to why they need to share something. And you can have a low risk user that we allow to share. Obviously, these are built alongside normal policies as well. There's always going to be some data that you just don't want shared regardless of that user's risk, but these are to help supplement and build those out dynamically as well.
And this is retrospective, right? We can go to existing DLP policies and add the adaptive capability to it. So if you've got policies already in place, DLP policies, and over the years you've had to water them down because people are annoyed, and they're now at the point where they're not doing very much and you're still getting exfiltration, you can switch this on and then when justified, implement the block, right? But for the rest of the time, pull stuff back as required.
Yeah, and this is really good for some of those situations like I mentioned before about maybe a compromised account. If your person is if we're able to automate as soon as that person's doing malicious activity and prevent that stuff from being exfiltrated, that's a lot quicker than having an analyst to notice something weird's going on and then logging into the platform and then figuring what that user's doing and then trying to manually convert a policy across. We can use this to, as soon as that behavior is picked up, automatically block that action.
And no one else does this, right, Beau?
No one else can do this. So we do it completely agentless as well, the way that we build it into the system. So no one else can do this capability, especially without an agent deployed onto all of those end devices. We do it completely agentlessly. It's already integrated within the system, obviously, between DLP and insider risk. That integration's already there. There's no configuration needed other than just simply turning on the function, and that's already built in.
Very nice. Why don't you show us?
Oh, let's go. All right, so I will jump straight across into my demo environment. The initial point of contact to configure this is under Insider Risk. So if you log into Insider Risk, there'll be a new section at the top here. This is in public preview. Everyone should pretty much have access to this at the moment. You'll see the dashboard. There will be an option here to say, do you want to turn on adaptive protection? Keep in mind it takes 72 hours to activate, so I've already done it previously. But you can see things like what policies are being created, what users are in scope, and what users are assigned to those risk levels. Obviously, this being a demo environment, there's not going to be a bunch of users in there with risk yet, but in a production environment, you get all that telemetry there.
So just on that, Beau, I know when we first released this in preview, jumping into the Purview console as in various places, you'd see a big sort of banner, turn on adaptive protection. So there were various points to actually activate this. And that 72 hours you're referring to, I think that's actually about the analytics scan kicking off to baseline all those risk levels. And that has to happen obviously first before we get a sense of how to assign risk to end users, yeah?
Yeah, spot on. And because the way Insider Risk does that is it also based it on user behavior. So we have to capture a certain amount of user behavior in order to establish a baseline and then establish those risk levels. Because it can alert for things and raise your risk profile based on behavior you don't normally do. Let's say I'm in IT, for example, and all of a sudden I start downloading a bunch of files from a HR SharePoint instance. That will raise its risk profile because it's not part of my normal activity.
Nice.
So under here,
stop interrupting.
No, you're good. So under here, under Insider Risk Policy, we can see where we've enabled it. We can see our risk levels. So this is where we can put a score in to say what we deem as a particular risk level for a end user. So you've got the options in here. We can go past for the activity detection on how long we actually want to look for. And we can also build out those risk level timeframes to configure it at that point as well. There won't be any users that have been assigned risk profiles in this because it's a demo environment, but your users would be listed here as well. And we can see what DLP policies from data loss prevention have been added into the system. You'll have a couple of options once you enable it to turn these on by default in test mode, as I'll show you in a second, but you've got the option to build those out dynamically as well.
I love this bit too, Beau, because it does mean, I know you're about to switch over to the other section of the console, but it saves you that trip into DLP to see the policies. I mean, it brings it all into the one view here.
Yeah, and you just have to keep in mind that only your adaptive protection policies will show here. So if we go to, for example, our actual full data loss prevention policy area, we can see there's a bunch in here. 2 of them are adaptive protection policies. So if I go into edit one of these, for example,
I notice the status there too is for both of them test without notification. So it's quite safe to switch this on to evaluate during preview because by default, nothing's going to go live, right?
Yeah, spot on. So you'll only get the I guess, telemetry to say that these things would have been blocked or these things would have been flagged. So most of the time we're going to say put that on. Unless you're already really confident of what you're trying to prevent, we recommend doing that test first.
And it builds these 2 policies for you too. We should point that out when you enable this or activate adaptive protection.
Yeah. So it'll do that by default as soon as we turn it on.
Awesome.
So admin units, this is not necessarily specific to this, but as we said before, this is where we can start building out granular admin permissions depending on the policy. So I could say particular admins in here are able to make changes and affect these policies. It's primarily for DLP at the moment. It is going to be extended out into other places as best we can. So as you can see here, we're going to see, just like a normal DLP policy, what locations we're going to apply this at. This is a default one that was added into the system when we enabled it, but I could scope this to Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive. Keep in mind as well that when you do build out your DLP policies, be as specific to location as possible because you'll have more actions. For example, if I did it for Exchange and SharePoint, the only actions that I'll have available to me are actions that can be done in both. So I couldn't do like an email header or something if I selected both of them, because that wouldn't be applicable to SharePoint. Not necessarily super applicable to this adaptive protection, but just in general, be as specific as you can. So as we can see here, there's a couple of rules that have been created. So for this one, for example, we can see that this file type is a Word document, an Excel spreadsheet, a PowerPoint presentation, an email. So it has to be one of those file types, and that user has to have had a elevated risk level for that to be pushed through. We've also got the option here for the same thing, but now we're talking about it to be a moderate or a minor risk level for this DLP policy to be applied. You can see it's fairly granular in here. So we're talking about an elevated risk level, which is the high risk. So convert elevated to high. That's where this is going to kick in. For this particular, if they're a high elevation or a high risk user, it's going to outright block, as you can see within these areas. if we have things like endpoint DLP and things like that, we can do things to block about to Bluetooth apps or RDP devices. But you can see pretty quickly here, because they're an elevated risk, blocked flat out. We're not going to allow that user to do these things at all. However, if they are a moderate or a low risk, we're only auditing the activity. So that user with those file types can share them externally as they normally would. We'll audit that action because they're at a lower risk level. As soon as that person that's at a moderate risk that can do this and share those things moves to high, this policy will kick straight back in, and they'll be prevented from sharing that stuff externally or internally based on how you build that policy out as well.
That's nice. Hey, Beau, can you jump back into edit? Because what we're showing, I think, with those two policies, the two extremes of those actions.
Yes.
But what in between audit and block?
Yeah, so you've got the block of override option. So typically this is going to be maybe a moderate risk user, depending on what information you're looking for. It'll block it automatically, but it will give the user the ability to override it with a justification. That will be logged back into the system as well, so you can audit that event. So if the user's done that, they will be able to share this information. That will be captured. So you can generate an alert based out of that from Activity Monitor or something like that. So you've got a couple of different options in that space as well.
Yeah, that's a nice one, because then you capture all those exemptions, right? So I've got managerial approval for this one-off, and you document that in the override, and then everyone's happy.
Yeah, and as you can see here, if I had that use override enabled, this is where I can kind of set it up. So I can allow overrides for those services specifically. Most of the time, if you're going to allow overrides, you're going to force a business justification. So that's where you have to provide a reason as to why you're doing something. That's then logged. You can use it for training, or if there's been a mistake made, and follow it up from there. So I don't think there's a lot of cases that I've seen where if you're allowing overrides, you're not having a business justification for it, but you've got the ability to do that either which way.
Yeah, same here. And just to reiterate, everything you're showing us, you haven't customized any of this. This is all built for you when you activate adaptive protection, right?
Yeah, spot on.
Policies.
Yeah. I could go into this, for example, and do another thing. So I could say, I might want to audit or restrict access to a device, pick up whatever I want, and then change that user risk profile for this. So you can be as granular as you need to. Keep in mind as well, these set of solutions here are specific for endpoint. If I had selected Exchange in my rule, I would have a bunch of different options as to what it's going to look for. So for example, if it's Exchange, I don't necessarily care about the file type. Maybe I care about the header of that email or something within it. You can obviously still do things within adaptive protection, like looking for sensitive information types or sensitivity labels to prevent that action. So just think of this as a bolster on top of a DLP policy you could have already had, just to make it a bit more dynamic in the way that they're being assigned.
Yeah. Actually, that's a really good point. Because if this was an existing policy, you'd be jumping in on that rules section where you were earlier and just adding the adaptive policy part.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe let's have a look. I'll see if I can show that off maybe while we're here. When it loads up. There we are. So as you can see here, we've still got admin units that's still going to be in each of these policies. I can scope this up and down depending on what I want to do. And then when we're having a look at some of these adaptive rules, we can start adding in additional actions. So if I wanted to in here, I could add that adaptive protection to one of these policies dynamically from that point. And then that would just say, for example, we've got this, we can add another condition, we can do a user's risk level. So we could say it needs to be Project Obsidian and they need to have a moderate risk level for this to be applied. And then you can start building them out from there.
It's nice.
The only last bit under that was under policy mode that I skipped out of is you can turn it on, you can turn it off, or you can have it in test. We obviously recommend when you're building these out, test them first so that you don't start blocking people that you're not actually expecting to. But just keep that in mind moving forward. And that's adaptive protection, which I nearly call adaptive scopes every time I talk about it, I should add. But in a nutshell, that's what it is.
It is brilliant, Beau. Let me just come back to us. Here we are. I just can't stress enough how easy it is to enable this. And again, if you're in that compliance.microsoft.com console, you're jumping around, you'll see various points we're fairly upfront about this. Adaptive protection, turn this on. So if you do turn it on, obviously read the doco, but when you do turn it on, after 72 hours, you're going to find those 2 policies pre-built. Everything Beau just walked through is going to be done. But that said, nothing is live. There'll be 0 risk to anybody because it's all without notification. Sorry.
Yep.
Scope them properly, tune them, start playing with it.
Yeah, and like we're saying it so often because it's actually a really big differentiator, and it's really powerful for those policies as well. A lot of the time, people will consider DLP policies as just a static kind of thing that we need to do to make sure this is being prevented. But the ability to start doing this dynamically, that's going to be a huge differentiator for our customers.
Absolutely. All right, Beau, thanks for that, mate. And if you like that demo and you want to see more of it next time, make sure you leave some comments and just give us the feedback, because we want to make this as practical and useful as possible.
And keep in mind, we can also force guests to do demos. So do not feel that you'll just be demoed to death with me and Lou. When we get a guest on, we can get them to be doing demos and showing off some of those capabilities as well.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Beau, we normally wrap up with a toy.
We do.
What do you got?
I have never been a super big, I guess, fiction reader. So I've kind of did it when I was younger. I had a massive break where I didn't read probably really for about 5 years, but I've started getting back into it. So I've been reading, I'm 4 books in. I'll show you book 1 because there's like 400 of them. But there's a book called, hopefully that shows up, The Eye of the World. So it's from the Wheel of Time series. So Robert Jordan wrote it. He's passed away, but he finished the series. It's about our world in the future if something had occurred. I'm not going to spoil it too much, but it's a fantasy novel. It's got magic. It's got powers. It's got heaps of cool stuff into it that I'm always super into. I'm already 4 books in. I think they're like, how many pages is this bad boy? Like 800 pages each.
Hard copy.
Oh, yeah. I've got 3 on hard copy, and then I realized there was about 400 million copies, so I started buying the rest on Kindle. So I've got it there because I was running out of room. But yeah, so I'm really enjoying it. I'm getting super into it. It's kind of got me back into reading and focusing on those points. So I'm loving it. Give it a read if anyone's interested. I don't recommend books often, so take them when I say that it's good. That it's pretty good.
Oh, well done. I'm really struggling these days to get back into reading, because so much of what I do, and I'm sure it's the same for you, is skimming lots of information. It's not about depth. It's about just getting the gist of everything. Yep. And it's just such an effort to get past like 3-4 pages. But once I'm past that threshold, I'm in.
Yeah.
But just getting there is getting harder, which is a nice segue into my toy.
We're very literate this time, so we're very focused.
I'm going analog. Can you see that? I'm not sure the blurring is working.
No, it's going good.
Yeah, I'm starting to kind of journal. I know we've talked about this before, Beau, because one thing I've become really good at doing is processing information. So Teams messages, emails, blah, blah, blah. And I'm finding that I can get stuff into my head and I can get it out through my fingers, and, whether it's email, Teams messages or tasks or whatever, stuff flows through me very efficiently.
Yeah.
I'm so efficient. But I'm not retaining or working anything. Nothing sticks in my head. So I'm finding that I actually need to put the brakes on that and go analog with a pen. It's also very therapeutic, right? To sit down with a cup of coffee and take a break from the screen and just go, I need to write something down. This slows me down. I'm being thoughtful, mindful about what I'm doing.
Yep.
I'm deciding, well, that doesn't really have to be done today, or if I don't do that, it's not that important, mainly because it's so much effort to write everything down. Then I transfer this stuff into whatever else I'm doing. And I'm just finding it's kind of working for me.
Yeah, I kind of do the same thing. Obviously, I do it a bit more digitally, but I did want to make a comment that your handwriting is beautiful compared to most that I see. So that's really good.
This has taken, and I'm not kidding, about 2 months just to get the muscle dexterity back.
Yeah.
Because that's the other part of it, right? Just actually the physical act of writing again. It's taken a bit of training.
Yeah, I used to do
that was a gift for it's a gift for my daughters over Christmas, actually, just before, and I've been sticking with it. And spoil yourself with a nice pen as well.
Well, I always find like if I'm trying to learn something, I have to write it down by hand to learn it. If I just type it up, I never learn anything. I have to write it down and study it that way.
It's ironic given what we do for a living, but yeah, it's the difference between just information flowing through me and actually being mindful with that information, doing something with it.
Yeah, I think it makes a big difference.
And I'm an old guy.
Go back to your roots.
All right. Anyway, that's all. That's it from me, mate. Anything more from you?
No, I think that about wraps it up. I think we're getting back in the swing of things, which is good. Yeah. We will be doing these monthly going forward again now that we've kicked back off. Obviously, we're going to get guests. If you have someone you actually want to see on the show, they don't necessarily have to be from Microsoft. We've had external guests before, maybe MVPs or someone else doing something interesting. Let us know. We'll reach out to them. We'll try to get them on the session as well. If there's anything in particular you want to see, for example, we did the adaptive protection today, let us know. Give us a comment. Hit us up on LinkedIn. Hit us up on Twitter. Go from there. Actually, we should end that we were recently on the Azure Security Podcast this month.
Glad you remembered.
I barely did, just because I was talking about everything else. It's been a busy month. But so we're on, we spoke about Purview holistically, me and Lou, along with the team there, with Sarah and the team. So if you are interested, I'll put a copy of that link in the show notes as well as everything else we spoke about today, and you'll have that reference material for whenever you want.
Yeah, in the meantime, you can just search on your podcasting app. It's literally Azure Security Podcast. Well worth a listen and subscribing to, actually. It's a great little... great production.
Not just because we were on there.
For guests.
Yeah,
sorry.
Not just because we were on the podcast. It's good, but ours is probably the best
start with that episode. I recommend that's the episode to start with, and then gauge whether or not you want to go any further after that. But start with that one.
Start with us.
Okay. All right, mate. And with that, I think we'll say goodbye.
Too easy. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Catch you next time, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.